20 January 1945, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The snow squeaks like dry chalk under boots while a Ford GPW idles, blue exhaust draping the wire. Corporal Clara Ames palms the wheel, knuckles split from cold and knurled from wrench work. She taps the choke, listens for the even cough of the 134 cubic inch Go Devil 4, and feels the pedal frame vibrate through her overshoes. The guard waves her forward. Mail, penicillin, and fan belts are stenciled on the canvas sacks stacked like sandbags beside the gate. She signs with a mittened hand, breath steaming as she pockets the manifest. Across the compound, a POW detail pauses. Private Kenji Sato, late of a clerk's bench in Hokkaido, watches the woman in olive drab climb into the driver's seat with the brisk certainty of a sergeant. In his Japan, gasoline is rumor. Private motoring has vanished behind ration cards and charcoal burners. He tells himself not to stare. He stares anyway. Inside the admin hut, private first class. Aiko Tanaka warms her hands around a dented mug and stamps a requisition for water pumps and brake shoes. Her family's return address still reads a War Relocation Authority camp. Her rank tab says, U.S. Army. When the phone rings, she answers, Tanaka, Wak, and writes a rail routing code as if it were a prayer. Clara heels and toes the clutch, double clutching like she learned on the farm. The GPW's short wheelbase skitters on hardpack, chains ticking the fenders. Canvas doors crack, then flex. She glances at the manifest again. Coffee rations, heater parts, a bundle of APO mail. Nothing heroic, everything necessary. Kenji files the site like a captured document. A woman at the wheel of a military truck, a country so thick with engines it lends them to women. His breath ghosts the air. The Jeep's exhaust ghosts the horizon. Somewhere in that blue curtain, a truth waits to be read. The morning opens with the sound of winning. A row of GMC CCKW 2.5-ton 6x6 trucks coughing awake, then settling into a steady, patient thrum. Clara walks the line with a pry bar and a rag, testing chain tension, tapping sidewalls, sniffing for raw fuel. The workhorse has its moods. The 270 cubic inch straight six will grumble in the cold until the oil thins. And she treats it like a veteran, with respect, never reverence. Rose Kowalski noses her civilian contract hauler alongside the motor pool fence and hops down with a grin that belongs to every shop floor in the Midwest. Morning, Corporal. She carries news the way truckers carry everything, casually. Her cousin at Willow Run writes of assembly jigs and flow lines, of defects hunted by travelers in a foreman's pencil, of B-24 liberators shuffling toward daylight with the inevitability of wheat through a thresher. 1 an hour, some weeks. Faster, others would say. Kenji inventories rations in the kitchen shed and discovers a word he hasn't seen since peacetime. Surplus. Loaves, still warm from town, stacked like bricks of sunlight. He copies the count twice, disbelieving his own figures. In his memory, smoke-belching gasifiers, tires wrapped in twine, a driver praying a worn-out clutch will grab. Here, replacement parts arrive in days, not seasons. In the admin hut, Aiko routes a rush order, fan belts, water pumps, spark plugs, to a railhead by Lake Michigan. She hardly looks up as the teletype chatters. Standard forms make miracles look ordinary. She signs, dates, and blots the ink. The convoy takes the road at interval, jeeps leapfrogging the big 6x6s, chains whispering on packed snow. Kenji tries to count the trucks by sound. He loses the number before he loses the noise, which is its own arithmetic. The air tastes of coal smoke and coffee. Somewhere downrange, a cold engine will turn because this morning's ink dried in the right square. Afternoon light turns the admin hut's window to a mirror, and Aiko studies her own face for the length of a breath before flipping a technical manual open to torque specs. Grease shadows make thumbprints where 100 hands have pressed the same page. She briefs a new clerk on routing prefixes and APO codes. A wrong stamp can waste 3 days. The right one can feel like medicine at the front. Behind her, the teletype stutters the country's heartbeat. Kenji, on outside detail, watches Clara coach a fresh whack driver into double clutching. "Listen for the transfer case," Clara says, fingers on the dash. "She'll tell you when she's tired." It is not ceremony. It is craft. Kenji sketches the Jeep from memory that night. Short 80-inch wheelbase, low hood, shovel and axe bracketed to the side, labeling parts in Japanese and English. The act feels treasonous and inevitable. The zoom out comes like a lens snapping, facts Aiko has copied into neat columns. The Army has fielded on the order of 2.4 million trucks. Nearly 650,000 of them are Jeeps. At Willow Run, a B-24 Liberator can roll off the line roughly once an hour at peak, a single factory pushing bombers into the sky as if time itself had been harnessed to a crank. And on the home front, civilian car making doesn't merely slow. It all but stops. Records show only 139 passenger cars manufactured during the entire war. What kind of nation throttles desire so completely that victory becomes its only product? Aiko closes the ledger. Kenji pockets a crumb of surplus bread as if it were contraband from a future. Clara wipes her wrench on a rag that began life as a floral kitchen towel. The page turns. The numbers, now living things, begin to move men and machines at continental scale. Dawn lifts like thin steel over Willow Run. Frost ghosting off bomber skins as rivet guns answer one another down the mile-long line. Rose's cousin walks her through it in a grease-blotted letter. Fixtures that cradle a fuselage. Torque wrenches clicking in chorus. Inspectors chasing red pencil circles until the circle disappears. 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830s hang in their nacelles like clenched fists. Each will make roughly 1,200 horses, enough for a Liberator to carry an 8,000-pound bomb load across an ocean of weather. On good weeks, she writes, it feels as if a B-24 rolls off the line every hour. On better weeks, time itself seems to slide forward on rollers. Back in Wisconsin, same morning, different air. Clara checks her dispatch times against the railhead schedule. The habit would have been common. Synchronized truck intervals with the train's consist so pallets lift straight from bed to boxcar. When the teletype rattles out a ferry assignment, Aiko smiles. Women pilots will take fresh trainers to the desert that afternoon. The WASP, nearly 1,100 of them, have already ferried more than 12,000 aircraft, over 60 million miles of sky made ordinary by checklists and nerve. Kenji's shock doesn't arrive as spectacle. It lands as procedure. He watches a whack driver log a pre-trip. Oil, coolant, tire pressure, chain tension, light check. He hears the phrase TM says and realizes manuals, not moods, rule this place. He remembers charcoal gas rigs or hand-pumped fuel feeds and feels the difference in his teeth. The day holds no headline, yet the impossible statistic glows at the edge of vision. A single American plant can outpace the monthly output of entire enemy sectors. Rose folds her cousin's letter and tucks it into her pocket like a talisman. The conveyor doesn't move people. People become the conveyor. A wall map in the admin hut blooms with string and pins. Wisconsin to the lake ports, lake to railheads, rail to shipyards, shipyards to the wide Pacific. Iko would have pinned it this way to brief an inspector. The image is clean, the logic merciless. Then she adds a second sheet. Numbers. The recap, explicit time jump to 1944, spells it out like an indictment. U.S. submarines have ripped out the circulatory system of an empire. Merchant losses that year alone climbed toward 2.7 million tons. Cumulative losses past 5 million. Tankers go first. Without them, aviation fuel becomes ceremony. Training hours shrink. Convoys thin and then vanish. Clara signs for coffee and tires as if the act were weather. She would have known the ritual. Requisition number, initial, countersignature, pallet jack, sling, truck. The ordinary moves forward because ordinary people protect it from drama. She checks the GMC's hub temperature with the back of her glove and notes the feel, warm, not hot, before climbing in. Kenji studies an old shipping schedule, the kind he once would have stamped and filed with pride. The names of hulls read like family. Most are crossed out. He thinks of a small island nation that began the war with roughly 43 million barrels of oil in stock and very little of its own. He thinks of the Dutch East Indies slipping out of reach under gray wakes and periscope glint. The arithmetic is not abstract. It is felt in the gut, in the sudden quiet where engines used to be. A locomotive horn carries across the cold, and the convoy steps off to meet it. What Clara does with her hands, turn, brake, signal, Iko does with forms. What Iko files in ink becomes Kenji's silence. On the edge of the map, the pins stop where the ocean begins. The numbers continue. The warehouse breathes steam in the cold. Canvas mail sacks stacked to the catwalk and labeled with APO. Numbers like coordinates to the heart. Aiko reads a bulletin and then reads it again. In Europe, the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, Black Women in Army Green, has cleared a mountain of undelivered letters with 3 shifts, 24 hours, assembly line logic applied to longing. 17 million pieces in roughly 3 months. The figure would have sounded like myth if it weren't stitched to names. Rose brings heater cores and a crate stenciled COCOA SOLUBLE. She laughs that hot chocolate wins wars, and she isn't entirely joking. The convoy doctrine is simple. Keep the interval, trust the brake lights, let the 6x6 do what it was built to do. Clara rides the clutch just enough to feel the weight, then settles the engine at a patient idle that soldiers would recognize as mercy. Kenji watches a whack sort mail by the rhythm of breathing. Last name, first name, unit code, bag. Somewhere, a private who thinks he has been forgotten will get a letter with a child's shaky drawing and a corner of a church bulletin. Morale is not a slogan. It is a system. It arrives because a requisition found a rail car, because a ferry pilot moved a trainer, because a woman here signed a routing form, and another there drove a truck through snow. Later, in the barracks, Kenji folds the day into itself. He has seen scarcity enforced by ceremony. Today, he watched abundance disciplined by procedure. He holds the impossible statistic like a hot coal. A battalion of women moved more messages in weeks than some armies move in a year. He falls asleep to the sound of sacks sliding on wood, a nation's heartbeat sorted by hand. Mid-morning snow squeaks under boots and chain links as the motor pool exhales into motion. Clara eases the CCKW off its chocks, checks mirrors, and feathers the clutch until the straight six hum steadies. Manifest reads like a quiet victory. Mail, penicillin, heater cores, flour sacks. The bakery steam hangs over town like a white flag. Inside, surplus loaves land on wooden racks with the soft thud of abundance. Rose swings her tailgate flush to the loading dock and jokes with the baker about GI toast by the acre. But she's watching timing, not talk. 30 seconds long as a jam 3 trucks back. She bumps the bed, takes the weight, straps the stack, logs the pallet number. Nothing heroic, everything necessary. Kenji stands with the snow shovel he doesn't need, listening to the traffic discipline of a free nation. Convoy interval, arm and hand signals, a sergeant's palm dropping to slow a stretch of blacktop river. He can smell yeast and hot brake linings. In Hokkaido, he had seen bread rationed to shadows and tires kept alive with prayers. Here, a quarter-ton Jeep whips past to relay an order. The driver, wax stripes, nose red from cold, flashes a grin like a password. Aiko turns a requisition into motion, pencil squaring the boxes, routing stamps clicking in cadence. She thinks of the path each sack will trace. Truck to rail to ship to field kitchen steam curling over a shell-pocked ridge. The arithmetic is moral as well as mechanical. Calories, speed, predictability. The men who eat this bread will climb farther, shoot straighter, believe longer. Clara coaxes her truck up through second, the canvas breathing behind her. The convoy stretches out until it looks like certainty itself, a dotted line laid down in rubber and patience. The day tastes of coffee and coal smoke and the warm heel of a surplus loaf. Aiko flips open the TM and finds the place by feel. Torque values smudged to a thumbprint, safety wire diagrams outlined in pencil ghosts. She briefs the new clerk on APO prefixes, on how a single mistyped digit can send a crate wandering for a week. "We don't ship boxes," she says. "We ship time." The teletype chatters, and she hears schedules resolving into footsteps. Clara stands with a mittened hand on the dash and teaches a private to hear the transfer case. "She'll tell you when she's tired," Clara says, easing the shifter through the dogleg. The CCKW answers with a thin whine that settles as the revs drop. The girl nods, writes it down, then tucks the note where notes go, to the bones. They grease zerks till the gun shudders, snug wheel nuts to spec, wipe the ferrous glitter from the drain pan and read its story. Not a failure coming, just work well used. Kenji sketches his first honest thing in months. An 80-inch wheelbase Jeep from memory, shovel and axe, bracketed to the side, blackout light razor-edged against the fender curve. Beneath the profile, he writes the terms twice, once in kanji, once in the American's block letters. He is not stealing secrets. He is recording a language. He thinks of charcoal burners back home, of hand-primed fuel and carburetors that flooded like grief, and understands why these people win. They capture uncertainty in manuals and beat it to death with procedure. Aiko closes the binder and feels the room exhale. Outside, a truck barks, then settles. Inside, a requisition dries in its box. Kenji shades the Jeep's hood hinge darker. Clara wipes her wrench on a rag stitched from a floral apron and smiles at the new driver. Somewhere downrange, a squad will eat hot. March 1945 arrives with headlines hot enough to melt snow. Tokyo burned in a single night until the sky glowed like an opened furnace. The words cross the wire to Wisconsin while the motor pool smells of gear oil and cold iron. Clara logs mileage, checks lash on a load marked medical, and listens to the radio man murmur targets and wins. No drama in her hands, just a practiced arc of the wrist as she chalks a tire she'll rotate at noon. Rose reads a short letter from her cousin at the bomber plant. The line didn't slow, not even that week. Aluminum shipments, octane drums, incendiary casings. Every noun a verb if you push it hard enough. Aiko files the bulletin with a note. This was the deadliest single night of air attack in history to that point, a fact that feels like a number and a wound. She adds an asterisk in the margin, context, not triumph. Then she goes back to routing brake shoes, because missions tomorrow will still depend on stopping today. Kenji sits on his bunk under a bare bulb and thinks about chemistry as strategy. Jellied gasoline that clings, magnesium that burns like a small sun, high-octane fuel that turns distance into geometry. He hears the convoy pass beyond the fence, 6x6s rolling at interval, and understands how fire leans on quiet. In his memory, scarcity was sacred. Here, abundance behaves. The impossible statistic edges into focus without fanfare. In a few hours, one American city's factories can outship a month of an enemy's capacity, and a single raid can gut more urban square miles than years of attrition elsewhere. Clara tops off the radiator with a thin plume of steam. Aiko signs for cocoa and gauze. Rose drops a gear and lets the engine pull like a promise. Snow hisses under tires. The night over Tokyo is still red in the mind, but the road in Wisconsin stays black and straight. The cold snaps like a salute when Aiko pins fresh tallies to the admin wall, the paper crisp as authority. She would have briefed an inspector this way. Start human, end huge. First the hands. Clara's convoy returns with canvas breathing, brake drums warm but not hot. Rose's logbook shows on-time arrivals. Kenji's work detail leaves the yard broom clean. Then the spine. Trucks on the ledger and figures that look like printing errors. On the order of 2.4 million for the Army, with nearly 650,000 Jeeps. She writes the WASP line in a hand steady as a surveyor's. Roughly 12,000 aircraft ferried, more than 60 million miles flown. She adds a single phrase beside Willow Run, bomber an hour, because sometimes a statistic has to wear a sentence to be believed. Kenji reads the counter rows he knows too well. Merchant tonnage lost by his nation, millions of tons gone. Training fuel rationed until pilots rehearse more in classrooms than in air. He looks at the map's blue pins that stop at oceans and thinks of oil stocks that began the war finite and then thinned to rumor. This is not humiliation by spectacle. It is defeat by multiplication. Clara signs a stack of maintenance cards and slides them into their slots. Every signature is a one-syllable reason a truck did not die today. She would have noticed how the system catches small failures before they become large ones. How load plans trust the next unit because the last unit earned it. Aiko steps back from the board. The room seems smaller because the numbers now take up space. The impossible statistic that lands last is the quietest. An ordinary morning's output here would have exceeded an enemy workshop's month. Kenji exhales, and in that breath something old leaves him. The loudspeaker clears its throat on the 14th of August, 1945, a Midwestern voice wrapped around a world-historic sentence. The news lands the way snow lands, soft, absolute, everywhere at once. Clara looks first at her odometer, because drivers think in miles, then at the service board, because peace will still require order. She will likely fog engines with oil, tape gauges, drain fuel bowls, and brush Cosmoline over the bright steel that took them through winter. If a motor pool has a ceremony for victory, it sounds like wrenches being rolled up and signed back. Rose pulls her truck to the margin and lets the straight six idle, a soft animal puzzled by the sudden quiet in its harness. She thinks of the letters in heater cores and cocoa tins and gauze, of the way each noun refused to be small once it was strapped to a pallet. She touches the dash like you touch a shoulder at a funeral. Thanks, not farewell. Kenji does not weep at the broadcast. That happened months ago when a woman downshifted past the wire and showed him the arithmetic of a free people. He watches a whack driver back a Jeep into its slot with a surgeon's economy and feels the old vocabulary, honor, shame, shed their sharpness. There will be forms to sign, interrogatories to answer, a voyage home that will taste of salt and doubt. He will likely carry one American word past customs: surplus. Aiko records the message, then returns to the stack of demobilization memos because endings are logistics too. She will stamp disposition for vehicles, parts, and paper, trusting the same dull excellence that won the long winter. Engines tick as they cool. Somewhere beyond the fence, a train inhales. The nation holds its breath and then, gently, lets it go. Autumn loosens the first leaves over the motor pool, and Aiko drafts an after-action report that would have read like a ledger of lives. She writes the impossible facts without embroidery, production measured in floods, Jeeps and 6x6s enough to draw roads on maps, a passenger car industry throttled to almost nothing, only a handful more than 100 built during the entire war, so factories could build what the front actually needed. She adds a note in the margin about custody and capacity. Estimates of POW mortality in American hands under 1%, contrasted with the brutal rates suffered by Allied prisoners in Japanese camps, evidence that abundance shapes ethics when it is organized, not hoarded. Clara pockets her dog-eared TM as if it were scripture. She will likely take this competence into a peacetime that suddenly looks mechanical in the best sense. School buses that start on the first try, county snowplows that run before dawn, a nation that expects systems to work because they just did when it mattered most. Rose considers the new highways being talked about and hears the convoy in their blueprints. She knows what lanes are for. Kenji boards a ship with a notebook of American words: transfer case, torque, routing code, surplus. He understands now that the shock at the wire was not cultural novelty but strategic revelation. When women drove, an entire society moved. He will return to streets where fuel is measured in teacups and watch a nation rebuild by counting carefully. Aiko signs the last page and sets her pen down. The final paragraph writes itself: a democracy put procedure behind generosity, women behind wheels, manuals behind courage, and numbers behind mercy. That is how it made victory ordinary enough to repeat. In the cooling air, a dormant engine ticks like a clock that kept better time than war.